Sitting there. We have 1 minute. I'm counting it down on here. Oh, there it is, 6 o'clock. We ready to go? Good evening. I'm Brian Wagner. I am Mayor Pro Tem, filling in for Mayor John Murphy, who's in town today. I want to welcome everybody, and this is the City Council meeting, June 26, 2023, for the City of Petoskey. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. City Clerk Beck, please say roll.
Demore, present. Shields,
Here.
Wagner,
Here.
Walker, here, and John Murphy is absent.
We have a quorum. Next up is our consent agenda. And in most of my 3.5 years here, we've had the standing 2 items on the consent agenda. And when there's been more, there's been some confusion. So I printed out to read what a consent agenda is. And I'll get into it. So a consent agenda contains routine items which do not need further discussion. The whole group of items is approved in one motion and one roll call vote. In the minutes, the action passed in the consent agenda are recorded individually and in full. If discussion of an item is desired, it can be removed from the consent agenda and discussed immediately after approval of the consent agenda or in its normal sequence on the agenda. The printed agenda we're covered there. So in the past, there was some concern over maybe not giving enough time for questions. And so anyway, that's what a consent agenda is. It helps meetings go by a little more efficiently. Tonight, we have 4 items. And I'm going to suggest that if there is clarification needed, just like when we only have 2 items, let's go ahead and clarify that before voting as a whole, or if any of the council members want to move 1 or 2, that's fine. So our first one is adoption of a proposed resolution that would confirm approval of the following. A, June 5th, 2023, regular session city council meeting minutes. B, acknowledge receipt of a report concerning certain administrative transactions since June 5th, 2023. Authorize motor pool purchases through the Michigan Deal State of Michigan purchasing contract and the National Intergovernmental Purchasing Alliance. And then the 4th one is authorize contract with Payne and Dolan Inc. of Gaylord in the amount of $150,000 for Little Traverse Wheelway repairs. So with that, any discussion, questions, motion? Mr. Moore.
I just have a quick question on item 3, Payne and Dolan. Is that Mr. Robbins I directed to or Shane? I'm just curious, we used them apparently before, and I just was looking to see, I'm assuming we had a positive experience with them and why we're going with them again.
Yes, we did use them last year for wheelway resurfacing, and we're satisfied and pleased with their product and their service and follow through.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion or motion? Eric?
I'll make a motion to approve the proposed resolution.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Support.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Beck?
Shields,
Yes.
Demore,
Aye.
Walker,
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes. Motion passes 4-0. Next up is public comments. And with that, we welcome public comments on anything that's not on our agenda tonight. If there are any other topics, you can please come up to the microphone in the middle, turn the button on, it'll turn green. Introduce yourself, your full name, your address, and we like to keep those for like 3 minutes, basically, if anyone has any comments. Any comments from the public or online? With that, we move on to city manager updates. City Manager Shane Horn.
A few things to highlight this evening, council. Got a glare and I cannot see. A few street construction updates. So Bridge Street is, as we all know, is under reconstruction right now. Yeah, I think it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. The restoration and tree planting has completed. All concrete and sidewalk installation is also complete. They will be paving tomorrow and Wednesday this week, obviously weather depending. And then it'll be open to all traffic once paving is complete. This is the Bridge Street section. Maple and Porter's section, the paving has completed there. The streets are open to through traffic and local traffic, and then tree planting and restoration will be complete once undergrounding has been completed in that section as well. Few pictures to show you. So this is Bridge Street looking west. You can see it's and looking east, both directions. You can see the road is in really good shape, ready for paving. All of the flat work is complete. Drive approaches, concrete. Sidewalks have been installed. So now it's just waiting for paving, and hopefully we have a window of a couple days of good weather here that we can get that completed. Also wanted to mention to you, Mike Robbins and myself have been working very closely with MPPA on a potential solar project. This will be located at the Howard Road landfill site, partnering with Solar America Energy. Currently as of June 30 is when the actual window opens through USDA rural development. A program called PACE, which is Powering Affordable Clean Energy. Congress authorized $1 billion for a PACE. So we've been working closely with Solar America to package up our project here in Petoskey, which would be a 3 megawatt solar array install at the landfill site. They would package our project along with a couple other sites in Michigan and submit a letter of interest, which would be, again, the portal opens June 30. It stays open until September 29th. We desire to obviously always be first in line. So we want to have ours submitted on the first day that the portal opens. So we will be ready to do so. Again, this is simply a letter of interest at this point, not asking council to commit to anything at this point. If we are so chosen to proceed to the next step, that would be an application, which would obviously come back to this body for further consideration. So again, MPPA has been our partner throughout this process. We've had multiple meetings with MPPA. They have ran the pro forma, and it's certainly something that we can absorb in our system and interconnect into our system. So they have reviewed the documents that have been submitted to this point and recommend submittal of an LOI. And then again, we'll see how this process goes forward. Based on we're assuming that USDA will get inundated with LOIs, as you can imagine. So there'll be a lot of interest in this. It's essentially rural development will forgive up to 60% of the loans for renewable energy projects. So as we did this, I don't know how long ago we did this. We went through this exercise at this location, but with this grant award and this forgivable loan, this makes this project much more viable. Without it, obviously, we'd still be in a pretty tough shape financially, but with the loan, it certainly makes this a green light project going forward. So we're anxious to see how we stack up with others. We think we'll get potentially some bonus points collaborating with other communities as we bundle these together. So we'll kind of see where that goes. Mike is here. If you have questions specifically on this project, he is available for any sort of, Q&A. Again, this is simply just an LOI at this point. We will really dive into this at much greater level if we are so chosen to move forward in the process. It might have been it. Frozen. Oh, and just wanted to, I think probably Brian will probably hit on this in his comments, but obviously the our 4th of July events are coming up right around the corner. Starting with our parade, which starts at 6 o'clock, 7 to 9 down here at the Bayfront. The Little Traverse Historical Society will have an ice cream social on the 4th. We'll have live entertainment happening down here at the Bayfront in Festival Place from 7 to 10. And then shortly after dusk, we will shoot off the fireworks over the bay right around 10:30 or so, depending on how clear of a night it is, I guess. But that's kind of it'll be a long day, a lot of activities going on around the city. Obviously, all of the, look at Becky, all the downtown shops will be open and available for people to peruse and hopefully purchase items throughout the day as well. So our vendors and business owners will be open and readily accepting people in their establishments. So excited for that. Last year was I had just gotten into town about that time. So to see the amount of activity downtown during the parade and after was pretty impressive. So I'm anxious to participate again. So any questions for me at this time?
Questions? Eric?
Thank you, Shane, for that. I do have questions about the solar project, but it potentially is too early. Just one. Is there any collaboration with, or would a letter of support from a Groundwork Center, other community organizations, would that help at this point, or is that too early? That's probably more of an application process.
Yeah, I think that's probably an application process. We will do a letter of support from the city. I did talk with the mayor before he left town. They would like the mayor to have just a little quote about the importance of sustainability and how that matches our master plan priorities. So he's provided that. So we'll have a quote, we'll have a letter of interest or support from the city. And then once the application period opens, we will ask many different entities for their letters supporting this project. So certainly we will do that at that time.
Okay. And do you know, is community solar, is that part of the PACE program? Is that excluded from the PACE program? Is that something to explore at some point in this process?
The PACE programs are designed for very larger scale. I think I'm looking at the pro forma. The minimum loan is $1 million. So we'll obviously package ours with the other entities to meet that threshold, but these are larger scale installs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions, council? Looks like not. One quick comment on the 4th of July. So I think the 3rd year in a row that the Petoskey Rotary Sunrise was asked to organize this 4th of July, all of those events. And we've had a significant number of businesses and individuals who, the number is over $30,000 we've raised so far. And the city does a great job in providing their resources as well. So I just want to thank them while we have the opportunity. Any comments from the public on city manager's report? Hearing none. We will move on to an appointment, consideration of appointment to the Greenwood Cemetery Board. And we're asking for the appointment of Lori Paul of 603 East Lake Street for a 5-year term ending May 2008. I don't personally know her. We've met, so I'll look for some support, but I was really impressed with her application. And she's served on the Zoning Board of Appeals, Petoskey Public Library Board, Friends of the Library Board. And then the question about what board or commission interests you and why are you applying? The cemetery board. Cemeteries connect us to our past, allow us to honor our deceased and provide tranquil green space for the community. While often overlooked or avoided, cemeteries play an important part in the life of our community, which I was really impressed with that comment. So with that, do we have a nomination? A motion, rather?
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second or support?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and support. Any comments?
I just have a quick follow-up question. So I'm assuming Lori is no longer going to be serving on the zoning board of appeals. And just a question, does that mean that we have an opening at this point?
That is a yes to both those questions.
Thank you.
A good question, and we're always looking for good people to volunteer for these great boards and commissions. Any other comments, questions from council, from the public? With that, Ms. Beck?
Demore. Aye. Shields.
Yes.
Walker. Yes. Wagner.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Thank you. Next up, old business. First is adoption of a proposed resolution authorizing the city manager to submit an Eagle Brownfield grant for the former Michigan Maple Block property, and I turn that over to Shane Morris.
Thank you. So this has obviously been a project that we've been working on. Really, that goes back almost a year now with this particular developer and his partners. So as we know, these projects don't happen without incentives at the local level, at the state level. It needs to be a truly a public-private partnership. So the developers looking at it, turning over every rock, looking for every opportunity to make this project pencil out, if you will. And so we're partnering with him in that effort, trying to look at any and all opportunities. So as we talked about this, and we talked about a grant and loan concept through Eagle, through a brownfield. The grant is $1 million. There's no match requirement. That's fairly straightforward. The loan became a little bit of a concern from the standpoint that the city would be the signatory. We would guarantee it essentially with some protections built into it through an implementation agreement. As we worked through that implementation agreement, we saw some things that we wanted to work with the developer to try to kind of tighten up, if you will. And so we didn't feel like the implementation agreement was quite ready for this meeting. But we had a pretty hard deadline to get an application submitted by June 30. So I have talked with our representative at Eagle. She has let me know that if it's the desire of City Council to proceed with the grant, we can do so this evening, separate out the loan piece and be able to submit a kind of an application for the grant. And then we can amend that application if the desire of council is for us to continue to work on the loan aspect of the brownfield and continue to work with the developer, continue to work with our partners, and fine tune that to get to a point where council is on board for us to proceed in that fashion. So I have a few people in the audience this evening. If you didn't get a chance to meet them, Susan Wenslick, she's right behind the podium. I can't see her, but I know she's there. Yeah, I know. Susan's with Fishback. She is our brownfield consultant. We all know Mac. Mac has been here multiple times. Typically, Mac would be filling this role. Mac has been hired by the developer to represent the developer in this brownfield project. So the county hired Susan, and we have utilized her on our side as well, and she's been very helpful throughout this process. So both Susan and Mac are here in the audience. Obviously, our city attorney is here as well. So tonight, and nothing is simple, I guess, but tonight, all I'm asking for is for authorization for me to sign the application for the grant specifically. Not asking for the loan at this point. I believe we still have some work to do on our side of it, working with our consultant to try to kind of flush out a few of the details. But that's where this is at. Currently, so this is a $1 million brownfield grant. The loan could be up to $1 million as well, but again, that would be up for discussion at potentially at the next meeting if we can work through the details. So I guess I'll just open up the floor at this point, understanding that we have a couple brownfield experts in the room that are here and available to answer concerns. To try to get direction on moving forward.
Thank you, Shane. I'm going to turn it over to council for discussion, for comments, a motion. We'll start out with Mr. Moore.
So I don't exactly know who to direct this question to, but it's probably Mac. At our meeting on March 20th, it was indicated that the development would have over 200 units and would include workforce housing. And our agenda packet repeats that again today. Yet in all the materials I've reviewed so far, I don't see any written or legal commitment to the number of workforce housing units or even a range of units and the duration of the units that the developer commits to provide. So first of all, did I miss something?
In the information related to the grant?
Anything in writing so far?
No, not at this point, but we're working to.
You're the button, Max, sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. No, but we're working to develop that number in that piece. So, but no, not in the grant materials. It's noted as workforce housing. There's a commitment to that. We don't have a number just yet.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
And now my next question is probably for Susan. Sorry to make is that a provision that can be included in the development implementation agreement, whether we move forward simply with the grant or with the grant and the loan together?
Yes, absolutely. As public servants and using public dollars, my recommendation to any government is that you decide what is the public good for you for this project. For Eagle, they define public good as environmental cleanup, jobs, investment, increasing the tax value of the property. MISTA, one of the other grants that the development team has applied for, says public good is workforce housing at a certain income range. Is one of those a public good for you? Is that enough? Do you want to put it in your development agreement? That is for you to decide.
Okay, and would you recommend that development or implementation agreement exist, even if we only go forward with the grant?
Yes.
Yep, okay,
definitely.
All right, and this came from a constituent. I think it's been answered, but I'll put it on the record. Am I correct in understanding that application for the $1 million grant does not obligate the city to seek the $1 million loan?
Correct. Eagle typically wants to see some local skin in the game, but in this case, we're looking at a pretty big brownfield plan. And so that would also provide local skin in the game. I guess my question would be, can they make the project numbers work without the loan? So, I would want to look at what all of the numbers were. And I asked Shane about a pro forma and he said that's coming. So we can get a better idea of that as we go forward.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here this evening.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. So, and I should address this question too as well. This the local skin in the game comment you made there. It came. How common is, and looking statewide, how common is the request to a municipality to guarantee a loan for a development project and that serve as the skin in the game?
In this particular Eagle program, it's required. The statute requires it. There's no other option. These loans can only be, and the grants can only be made to local units of government. And so it can be city, county, brownfield authority, a couple other entities. But there is no option other than for you to whatever local government unit it is that accepts the grant and the loan, you have to guarantee it. It used to be strictly, your, Shane, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Your revenue sharing. You used to have to commit your revenue sharing, and that was the only option. They put out a couple of other options because there were some cities that refused to commit revenue sharing, or to risk it. And so there are some other options now, but yeah, you have to commit something.
Are we
For a loan.
are we one of the first in the state to be doing, if we went forward with doing a loan, are we one of the first?
Oh my goodness, no, 30 years of brownfield loans, 25, something like that. Yeah, there's been a lot of loans under the bridge,
Thank
to
you.
mix a metaphor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Sorry, more for you. So you just said something I wasn't aware of. So what are the clawbacks other than revenue sharing? I wasn't aware of that.
You can put up gosh, I'd have to go back and look at the statute. It's been so long since I've done a loan.
No pressure.
Letter of credit, is there another one too? Isn't there three?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then as far as the grant itself, the city of Petoskey, once again, is the grantee, not the developer,
Correct.
right? So if the application's approved, the city will be asked to sign the contract with Eagle.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Ms. Walker?
Thanks. I had a couple of questions about in the demolition process itself. So, a large industrial building that must be abated and demolished, soil contamination that requires special soil management considerations. Just so that the developers are aware, we have no landfill in Emmett County, so there has to be some kind of plan for demolition and then hauling to excavating pits for the rubble and any concrete. And then the construction and demolition waste will have to go to Onaway. So I hope you are building out the costs of disposal because they're very expensive.
Yes.
And also the soil management considerations. Best management practices are to utilize both compost and in places where you can access it, biochar for the remediation of contaminants in the soil. So I would hope that that would be part of the process as well. That's it for me.
Looking at every option.
Mr. Shields?
So that's a good segue to a question I'm still kind of formulating, but it is for this is a question to the developers team, that if in a situation where the city did not work with the developer and thought it was not in our public interest to do the loan, will that impact the process going forward? Is the grant sufficient? As you earlier before the numbers weren't there, it sounds like you're still working on the numbers, but is there any more indication on the need for the loan component?
The short answer is yes, the loan is. The terms and conditions of the loan are pretty favorable. Eagle loan, no principal or interest for 5 years. And then after that, about 1.5% payments for the next 10 years. Money's at about 8% right now. So even just in a short period of time, about $80,000 a year of interest or so. There's a whole lot of financials there, but that would be, if that's not available, that's just an additional cost that would be problematic. So it's an important incentive, and hopefully we can work through all the details to ensure. I certainly understand that, and we want to ensure the protection of the community. I've worked on 15 of these, and 11 I represented the communities on those. So it's certainly important to have those protections in place in pieces. And I think that there's methods that we can do that, but it is an important component of the financing and would have a big impact.
Thank you.
Mr. Moore?
It's for Max. I have to sit down again. So we're the developer to get a commercial loan as opposed to this loan. Am I correct that the interest paid by the developer is reimbursable via the brownfield tax increment?
Yes, that's correct. For those brownfield eligible activities.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Matt,
Mr. Shields?
Mac, would the loan component be used for the cleanup as well, or is that?
Yes.
So it's all for the restoration?
Clean soil management, environmental response activities. Yep. Yeah, they allow for environmental response activities, asbestos abatement and demolition, but we didn't include that. The costs are so high that we're going to eat up $2 million in just environmental response activities. We have applied for through the Land Bank Authority, some support through blight elimination grant for that, are hopeful about that, but yes, it would be for environmental response activities.
Thank you.
I have a question, but it's.
Thank you, not moving the microphone. So. We're back in my mind.
Sorry for the musical chair. When things come to mind. So there's this provision in the grant language about termination. And if the grant's terminated, the state reserves the right to require the grantee to repay all or a portion of the funds under the agreement. You're familiar, I'm sure.
Yes,
with that
oh, yes.
provision.
I
Yeah,
think I wrote it.
you did. So there you go. So under what circumstances might that provision come into play? I understand it's prospective, but
Yeah, so in 30 years that I worked in the grant loan program, we never asked for a grant back.
okay.
The only way I would see it happening, frankly, is if there was fraud. You know, if you or something happened that was illegal. We had projects when I was with the state where the development fell through. The project was half done, it didn't get finished, or it got finished and the development just didn't happen for whatever reason. And those funds were never asked to be returned to the state. I think they see a public benefit in having that site cleaned up, having it ready for another developer, and so they don't ask for it back. The loan comes in. It depends on the project, how they put things together. If there's a financial need, like in this case, for the full $2 million, they have to split it. They can't do more than $1 million in grant money per project per year. There's just not really an option to do anything other than grant loan for this one unless we wait and start piling stuff on in different fiscal years.
And do loans have to be repaid regardless of success or failure?
Yes. That's why we do the development agreement. And ask for the line of credit or, some kind of loan guarantee from the developer.
Thank you so much.
I'll just sit here this time.
Mr. Shields.
You raised my hand. Thank you. This is just a comment maybe for council members. When you're mentioning the public benefit of just cleaning up the contaminants, I was reading through the packet. It kind of struck me. I didn't think it through earlier so well, but the site was, as I understand, correct me wrong, Manager Horn, but the site was grandfathered in before certain stormwater overland flow best practices that are mandated by the city for a new project. And so right now that site, if I'm correct, is subpar to what we'd want for water quality in our community. So definitely, if that's the case, would agree that contaminant cleanup would be in the interest of our community, as we have identified the water quality as a huge priority to our community. Just a comment.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? They've all been good. Tina?
So Shane, just as a follow-up then, were this to pass this evening, the next step relative at least to the grant and or the loan would be consideration of the implementation/development agreement.
Yes, so if this was successful this evening, I would package the grant application up, get that submitted this week, and then based on the direction of council, continue to work through the implementation agreement on the loan and have that hopefully packaged up ready for you for July 17.
But even if it was only the grant, we would also have an implementation agreement, correct?
I don't know if that's in your packet actually, but is it in the packet?
No, but
There's a separate agreement. Yes.
Grant implementation agreement.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Walker?
I just have one more question. Part of the agenda packet for this specific approval has there's an attachment on page 48. and it says consent for access to property. From what I understand, the property owners are still Michigan Block Corporation. So I'm a little confused about how we could be signing up on a project or allowing Brownfield a grant if the property is still owned by the original owners.
That is the case, that the property is still owned by the original owners. That form is, or the inclusion in there is part of the application and as part of the form. We revised that to include both the owner and the developer for consent for access. The access would be signed off on by both parties. The activity wouldn't proceed until the acquisition goes through, but both the owner and the prospective purchaser would be signing the access agreement.
Please.
If I may, Mayor, thanks. So do we have a timeline on the actual acquisition of the property?
Still working through all of those things. I'm not sure if Jeff is on the line, but he may have some additional information, but I know it's all part of this piece to work together. The hope is to begin work in the fall. I know, so. Yeah, it's contingent on a lot of this stuff. Is Jeff on? Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be great.
Hey, good evening, council.
Good evening.
Good evening, council members. This is Jeff Smoke with Great Lakes Capital. Sorry, I was trying to chime in earlier on a couple of those questions, but I don't think I could get through. So appreciate your time tonight. And to answer your question about the timing of the purchase of the land, we're targeting late September right now. We have a lot of work to do. As Shane mentioned earlier, with the rest of the whole host of incentives, both tax abatements and several state incentives will be seeking beyond just the Eagle grant and loan. So the goal would be late September land acquisition. And to go back to one of the questions earlier about the actual number of units for the AMI restriction, it is a bit of a moving target, but I'm confident to say it'll be between 40% and 70%. And that would be units between 80 to 120% AMI for clarification. And just as I mentioned on the planning commission call last week, for all practical purposes, all the units will be priced between 80 to 120, but that commitment will be, in that 50% plus or minus range, because you don't want to exclude people making more or less.
Mr. Shields.
And to follow up Mr. Moore's comment, will those numbers be in the implementation agreement? And I think the request is, can we have that in writing as we go forward?
Yeah, I think, we're going to have, a comprehensive development agreement for some of the tax incentives that we're going to be seeking with the city. So it can all be memorialized in that. I don't know if it needs to be specific to the Eagle grant loan, but we can certainly tie it all together. We're going to be committing to that. So however we memorialize that, whether it's for the Eagle grant loan or in one master development agreement that encompasses, a tax abatement and or pilot, we can certainly do that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Ms. Walker. Oh, it looked like you were ready to press it. Ms. Demore.
As long as you're on the line with us, the last time you were with us, I asked you if you had the total amount of funding, or at least a round number, that you intended to request from the city for the project. At that time, you deferred a response, and I'm just curious if you might have one now. Thank you.
Great question. And it is a bit of a moving target. So for example, we applied to the missing middle program prior to our last council meeting. And so we were informed a few weeks ago that we did not get any missing middle funds. So to replace that incentive, I'm applying for a placemaking award. So it's called, as you are probably familiar with, the RAP grants put out by the MEDC. So that is kind of the next award or next incentive that could synthetically create what we were seeking with the missing middle program. So still a bit of a moving target. I plan to have over a more comprehensive financial pro forma and what we call gap analysis to Shane by the end of the week. So what we'll be asking at a very high level from the city is, some form of aggressive tax abatement. The missing piece we didn't have last time was the assessor you know, we didn't have the numbers back from the assessor. We have those now. And it's twice as much as what I had originally thought it was going to be. So that's kind of the gap we're trying to fill. So it's extremely challenging to make the numbers work, but we'll share all that by the end of this week.
Some
And
more.
just a quick follow-up, am I correct then that the missing middle is the Mijda one, and that was the only one that would require the workforce housing for that money to be awarded? Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So that there was a commitment, and I think on the application, we committed to about 40% of the units. And just to rephrase, the missing middle, they liked our project a lot. And this initial round, we are not going to be getting an award, but in the chance that other projects don't go through, they will come back and reallocate. It was just the fact that Petoskey had already gotten an award for a smaller project in the first round of the missing middle. So, you know, they have certain rules where they have to allocate a certain amount of dollars to each specific region. And so the Northern Michigan region had already received their allocation. And so that was the feedback that we got. So they love the project. So there is potential, you know, if other projects don't come to fruition, that we could get cycled back through. But right now we have to obviously proceed ahead. You know, that's many months away from finding that out. So we're pursuing with the placemaking grant and a CRP award with the MEDC.
Thank you.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I would also make a comment that the RAP grant, having read through that pretty thoroughly, you score more points for indicating hitting certain AMI targets. So while that may not be legally binding, I think in the application, the developer would state that as a targeted goal to receive the RAP funding.
Thank you. Further
Yes, and
discussion?
we intend to do that. So I appreciate that comment, and we fully intend to maximize that.
Thank you. Further discussion, or do I have a motion?
I'll be happy to make a motion, Mayor.
Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Mr. Shields?
So I want to just make a comment. I will not be here at the next council meeting. I will not get to participate in the great discussion on the loan. So if I might make a comment right now.
Please.
And I want to start off by saying that I think everybody on this bench and this table in this community really wants to see more housing units. That's not a debated question. And looks favorably at the thought of this redevelopment ready property being developed. I think that is something that our community is very favorable, and this I've heard from all our council members this favorable for. When the loan question came up, and the fact that we're not voting on that tonight is because there was some legitimate concerns. And if I come from a perspective of mentality, want to say yes, and we have to say no. And I don't see that as being unwise of public money. I think if there are truly red flags, which I'm not the lawyer here, and I've heard that there were some red flags, and so I thank you, Mayor Horn, for getting some more time to get those addressed. I truly hope that they can be addressed, and that we can, as the body, can really evaluate the cost benefit after having those addressed for moving us forward. I understand that taking on that responsibility of the loan is many adjectives to how that could be concerning. And I, from where I sit, I also think it's concerning when a city can't help a developer make something happen of this scale and magnitude. And so if those certain concerns could be addressed in the loan through implementation grant or agreement, the letter of credit and how that shakes out, I would be eager to support that if I were here. Thanks.
Thank you. Other comments from council? And I'll make the comment. I think, again, we said this in all the past meetings, we're all for affordable housing and all, we need housing at every level. And we're supportive, and I hope the developer, I hope others understand that we've got a fiscal responsibility to do what's right. And I I get a little concerned at times. Some people just hear $1 million. We're guaranteeing that. That's a big part of our budget, frankly. And so doing our right homework over the next couple of weeks to make sure that we understand the full story and we understand the risk and risk mitigation tactics that are part of this are what I'll be looking for. And we're talking there about having a work session that I hope we can have before that. And I hope you can be part of that. It's not set yet, but we need to look at some dates. I think that is important and this would be worthy of that discussion. Comments from the public or online? Hearing none. Ms. Beck?
Walker,
Yes.
Shields.
Yeah.
Demore,
Aye.
Wagner.
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Thank you for the great discussion. Privilege.
Any other final questions while Susan is in attendance? Obviously, we'll try to bring her back if we can get a work session nailed down. Not, I think we're good.
Okay.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll stay rolling. Okay. All right, next up in old business, adoption of a proposed resolution authorizing submission of an application to Emmett County for the purchase of snowmaking equipment and related infrastructure for Winter Sports Park as part of the ARPA funding program. Again, I turn it over to Mr. Ryan.
Thank you. So as our discussion ensued a meeting or so back, we have an opportunity to partner with Emmett County as they've dedicated some funds to local municipal projects. That deadline is approaching July 1st. So that's a $50,000 grant opportunity that we can match up to $100,000. So as our discussion ensued, I pulled out of that discussion that there seemed to be some consensus to move forward with projects at Winter Sports Park, being that that is a community facility. I've heard all of the outstanding, really neat stories about that asset that we have in our community. So as we all know, last winter was challenging from the standpoint of being able to provide winter activities at the park. So one option was, there's a number of things that we would like to try to enhance at the park. Do some contouring of the hill, to have actual, maybe some tubing runs, to have some opportunities for access, whether that's a magic carpet, whether that's an enhanced tow rope system. But those things really don't matter if we don't have snow, right? So one option was to ensure that we can have that opportunity should we participate or try to generate a base of snow that we can have, that our residents and visitors can utilize the facility really outside of what Mother Nature provides us. So we would like to proceed with a request to Emmett County to participate with that grant opportunity and utilize those funds to seek some snowmaking equipment, whether that's portable equipment or maybe a few stationary fan-based units that'll allow us to build up a base, not only for the hill, but also to get us started on the rink itself as well, to kind of support that activity as well. So that's what is in front of you for discussion and potential consideration to allow us to kind of finalize that application to Emmett County before the deadline.
Thank you, Shane. Council, questions? Motion?
I do have questions.
Yeah.
I thank you, Manager Horn. I have heard from the community several times about improvements made to the Winter Sports Park as a desired goal. I just said to the council a little bit ago, my mentality is yes until I say no. and I'm gonna sound like I'm pushing back against this a little bit. I wonder, some questions I don't necessarily have answers for. Of if, so we can get a snowmaker, we can make snow. I know that snow then has to be moved around, and there's a stacking commitment and for making the snow. So I'm wondering if we get the snowmaking equipment, it just sits there because we don't have the staff capacity and we to make the snow be moving around to where it needs to be moved. So that's a thought, a question is that, you know, if Mr. Kringle Smith has thought, I'm sure he's thought through that, has answers for that. So that's just a question. And one of the comments I've heard from community members was how valuable our ice rink is. And this one particular community member travels all the way down to Muskegon area for an ice rink and thinks that our ice rink could be as much of a draw in our state if we invest in that. And you know, last winter it was open a couple of weeks because of Mother Nature. So, is there any look into refrigeration systems for that skate rink? And maybe that is outside the scope of the $100,000 budget we're talking about. I did a quick little research, and yes, so you have to call and get quotes. So that's just my thoughts on that. I think that investing. My request would be: could we phrase this as a request for making improvements to the Winter Sports Park, and not specify actually snowmaking equipment? Is that an option?
Question for you, Shane.
Yeah, that's really a question. How would our application be received if it's generalized like that? I would think they'd want us to get into some specifics on what we would actually use the money for, instead of just leaving it set aside to maybe partner with another project at that facility. But I mean, certainly I will submit an application based on the direction of council. You know, I thought there was some interest in snowmaking equipment. So that's why we went in that direction. I will say staff was very excited about the winter season. They were geared up for it, and ready for it. And they understand if we do have snowmaking equipment, what that level of commitment is. And they would be excited to match that expectation.
Mr. Moore.
Since at the last meeting, we sort of generally spoke about the winter sports park. When you took that idea to Kendall, was this kind of where Kendall went first?
Yeah, because like I mentioned before, the other things really don't matter if we don't have a base of snow to start with. So doing the contouring, doing the magic carpet or the tow rope concept, if we don't have snow, those things are going to sit unused. So I think it starts with making sure that we have a base that we can work with. And if we have a period of time, you know, a month without snow, you know, we'll still have a good base that we'll be able to generate, that will better keep the facility open, keep the lodge itself open, to be able to be utilized by families as it's been utilized in the past.
Mr. Moore.
Then I would just, well, first of all, as I said at the last meeting, I think to my mind, the use of ARPA funds, we're looking to the extent possible to benefit everybody, because that's why these funds came into our community. And we often talk about the ALICE population or people without means to be able to perhaps go to local ski hills and that sort of thing. And this is an opportunity for persons of all wealth, ability, et cetera, to access these opportunities. And I guess in response, Mr. Shields, what I would say is, you know, beyond this particular project, we may want to look at using more of ARPA funds for this or not. I don't know what people's persuasions might be, but that would be another opportunity if we really thought this was the way to go, that we could look at some of these other aspects as well when we looked about spending the balance of the funds. So thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments, questions? Ms. Walker, do you have any? No. Okay, so my comment is that I'm really appreciative Shane and his staff gave us a bit of a summary for our ward meetings. So last week on Monday, we're at 4 ward meetings. Our city convention was here on Wednesday. And in my ward, I shared this short list for these immediate funds. And 2 of them were safety related, and 1 of them was for the sports park. And I shared some of your comments, like this should be public facing and so on. And I had comments like, we should do a lot more for our parks. And I got thinking of this being matching funds from the county. This isn't just people who live in the city of Petoskey use the winter sports park. I like the idea that we're using county funds on ours to build something that can be used by people in the general surrounding areas. So, yes, Mr. Moore.
That was actually another idea that I had, not necessarily right now, but when we go to use the rest of this money, one of the things I read about ARPA funds is the importance of trying to build coalitions in using ARPA funds. And since we have surrounding communities that also use the winter sports park, I wondered if we might be able to engage them in some ways with their ARPA funds to kind of do more than we might be able to do with the funds we have, if that's the direction we decided to go. Thank you.
Thank you. So what's on the motion on the table is based on prior direction. Staff is recommending to use county allocated ARPA resources of $50,000 for snowmaking equipment and related infrastructure, supported by $50,000 City of Petoskey ARPA fund match, with a total not to exceed the amount of $100,000. With that, I'll entertain a motion or additional comments.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Ms. Walker?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Comments from the public? Yes, sir, Matt.
Thanks. A little bit out of my bailiwick, but I was a chair of a committee that worked with the city of Traverse City in expanding Hickory Hills. $3.8 million project, pretty extensive. And I'm sure we'd be happy to provide any assistance and support for snowmaking equipment, our experience in that area, as well as the experience of that expansion to help foster the winter sports park. So
Thank you.
Yeah, further comment on the ice rink too, and Becky, I'll call you up in a second on the ice rink. Is the new cover over the rink is supposed to help with stabilizing the climate and for the ice. It won't solve everything, but
Different ice rink.
you're talking about the big out.
I'm talking about the big one.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Becky Goodman.
I don't know my place, so I always hesitate to say I caught the word portable or movable. So you know what that could do. You could take it to Pennsylvania Park and the Winter Carnival Festival that we've been doing the last few years. That could expand just horribly, just beyond belief if we had snow there. Last year we had a snow sculptor who was the first time instead of ice sculptors. If he would come back and he did amazing work. So that talking about satisfying more people and reaching more people with that, just something to think about.
Thank you, Becky. Other comments?
So do I hear DDA's matching?
No further comments. Ms. Beck?
Demore? Aye. Walker? Yes. Fields?
Yes.
Wagner?
Yes, motion passes 4-0. Thank you, everybody. On to new business, which all 4 of these items are all first reading. So the first one is first reading of a proposed ordinance that would amend the City of Petoskey zoning map to rezone 1420 Spanish Avenue as a planned unit development. Turn it over to Mr. Horn.
Thank you. So I have our planner, John Eichelangeli, is with us this evening. The representative from the Maple Block site, Wayne Seeger, who probably need to find an office space here in the building for him because he's here so often, is here with us as well. So this has gone through the planning commission. So I'm going to have John kind of provide you an update of where we're at, how we've gotten to the point that we've gotten to currently, and kind of give an overview of the planning commission's work to this point. John?
Thank you.
Mr. Horn, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council. The Planning Commission met last week to review the final planned unit development proposal from the applicant. They went through the guidelines that were in the zoning code in terms of the various standards. And after deliberation and discussion with the applicant on a couple of other items that they wanted to see in the future site plan, they made a motion to recommend to council the first reading to change the zoning from this property from I2 heavy industrial to PUD planned unit development. Once that is approved by council and the property is rezoned PUD, the next step, aside from financing and that part of the project, the applicant would then come back to the planning commission for a final site plan review as part of their procurement of getting the zoning permit and other permits that are required by the project. One in particular is from Eagle. And then we'd go through another round of reviews with the various departments where they'd have the opportunity to comment on the final site plan and then submit letters of recommendation to the planning commission. So this evening, we're at the process where we have the first reading. The second reading would be subsequent, one of your subsequent meetings. But that's part of the PUD process. The planning and development process, I prepared a flow chart for the planning commission. Sarah could be so kind as to pass it around. The planning and development ordinance that you have in the zoning code is rather lengthy in terms of the process, and it can be broken down into 6 steps. The first step was the pre-application review, which was held by administrative staff with Wayne and his team from Mansfield. The second was the rezoning petition, which they completed. The third step was the preliminary PUD rezoning plan, which occurred at the March PC meeting. And then they had their final PUD rezoning plan, which was at the meeting they had last week. And now we're at step 5, which is the city council review and approval for the PUD rezoning. And once that's complete, the last step in the process will be the site plan review and permit that's required for each phase. This project, the PUD, the property would get rezoned as planned unit development, but there's actually 2 phases. The first phase is the apartment complex. The second phase is a outlot, 5,000 square foot parcel property at the corner that's being reserved for some form of commercial development. That development is not known at this time. It could be an office, it could be a restaurant, it could be any number of commercial uses that are consistent with the PUD. But that would be phase 2, and they'd have to come back at a future time to the planning commission for that site plan review as well. The applicant did submit to the planning commission a rather lengthy booklet with all of the plans, elevations, some of their data, stormwater. Not quite a final site plan review yet. The drawings are still preliminary. Planning commission has asked for additional information as part of the final site plan review. But I think the project at this point is in a very good place. The developer, as well as his consultants, have been very forward and very good to work with regarding information that's being provided by the city administrative staff. So do you have any questions at this point?
And with that, a couple comments, and I'll open it to questions. That beautiful rendering over there we received tonight, so we can look at close-ups of it. We also received the entire packet last Thursday. So with that, I'll open it up to council for discussion. Yes, Mr. Moore.
So with apologies in advance, the lawyer's going to get into the weeds here. I apologize. And my comments are not intended in any way to deter what we're doing, but to make sure we're doing this legally. So when I read your procedures for the PUD rezoning designation, and I read the ordinance, I read it differently than I think that you do, John. So I'm looking to our council to advise us if we are indeed positioned properly based on what's happened at the planning commission for council to move forward with this, or if in fact the ordinance requires that we have a final project site plan in order to do so. And if it's helpful for me to reference sections, I will, but that's in the weeds. Thank you.
So, and I may rely on John a little bit here to supplement what I have to say, but yeah, this is, and we talked about this at length earlier, and it really comes down to section 2504 of the zoning ordinance. It talks about what's required in a, kind of breaks this up into a few steps, right? The first, there's the petition for rezoning, there's the preliminary PUD rezoning plan, there's a final PUD rezoning plan. The problem that's arising here is that there is some unartfully worded sentence in the section that says a site plan. So that's problematic. I think read in context, it's referring to the final PUD rezoning site plan and not a full site plan. But what makes it even more confusing is it does go on to talk about what is supposed to be included in the final PUD rezoning plan, and it talks about what a plot plan has to include. Well, that references in subparagraph 9, quote, other site plan review information requirements as required by the Petoskey zoning ordinance. So I believe the opposing interpretation is that reference to the other site plan review information essentially means we need a final site plan now. So for what it's worth, I think both interpretations are defensible, because what I'm looking at just from a legal standpoint is like, is this going to be subject to challenge down the road? And that the only way that type of challenge would prevail is if our interpretation was arbitrary and capricious. Like we kind of make it up every time. We interpret it inconsistently. We don't have a real reason for why we're interpreting it the way we are. I don't see either interpretation, I think, is defensible. But I just think as a practical matter, and John can speak to this better than I could because he's been through this process so many times. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to require the developer to submit a final site plan now. As John mentioned, there are other opportunities for the city to review a site plan after we rezone the property. It is going to go back to the planning commission. If there is even after the planning commission approval of the site plan, if there are changes that they have to make in the process, there is some language built in that says if it's a major change, it will come back to you all, because if it changes the decision you made to allow it to be rezoned to a PUD, you get to look at it again. So if something changes, it's going to come back to you. So, and just one final point I want to make, because bottom line is we're going to have to revise this language. I don't like the way it's currently worded. And I found a really, really great example from the city of Ferndale and Metro Detroit, where they make very, very clear that, and it's actually your interpretation, but they make it very clear in theirs. And they say for the contents of a final PUD plan, it says it has to include the following. The first one is a complete site plan in accordance with the procedures of their Article 11 site plan review. So they're doing explicitly how you are interpreting this language. So if that's our intent, I think we need to change it for future projects to make clear that we want a final site plan as part of the PUD rezoning process.
So my follow-up question would be this: should we proceed just the way it is, or because in this language it requires approval, I'm not reading it, but approval by the city council of the final project site plan, should it read this way, but also conditional upon receipt of that final site plan for approval by city council? That's my question.
Right. And that's one of the options available to you guys tonight too. I mean, it's three options: approve, reject, approve with conditions. So, I mean, if you feel like it's something you need to see in order to make a final decision, your condition could be submission of whatever's missing from the site plan requirements. John will be able to speak to that. It doesn't sound like there's a whole lot that's required for a final site plan that's not already included in that packet, but I mean, that's an option available for you today while we think about how we fix this for future projects.
Right. And for me, it isn't because I feel like I need to see it. It's because this is confusing.
Yes.
And so I just want to make sure from a legal perspective that we're meeting the requirements of this, because it is murky here. So those are my thoughts.
Comments, Mr. Shields?
My comment is forgive me for a learning question here. Is there a current zone in our city where this wouldn't require the PUD? Or this type of development would always require this type of rezoning to a PUD? My question, the basis of that question is as a city looks forward in the future and looking at a citywide reevaluation of our zones, is there one existing one that this would fall into that the developer wouldn't have to have gone through this process?
Part of the property could have been rezoned for apartments. The reason why they're using the PUD is because of the scope of the project in terms of it has apartments and it's going to have a commercial component. So it's really it's a horizontal mixed use project.
And so our mixed use zone, it would still, if it was in the mixed use zone, it'd still have to go through a PUD to accommodate apartments.
A project of this scope, I would always recommend a PUD.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Moore.
And just for purposes of clarity, I have no objection to this PUD whatsoever. I want to support this. I just want to make sure we're doing it in a way that's consistent with the confusion of.
As I had mentioned to the planning commission, and I had mentioned it to Matt, I hate to use the term convoluted, but the ordinance is very, very poorly written. It uses the term plot plan, rezoning site plan interchangeably. And from a professional point of view, there's a difference between a plot plan and a site plan. That's a plot plan. Okay, that's really the basis. Typically, a PUD is reviewed and approved on a conceptual plan of this detail. Once the PUD is approved, then the next step is a detailed site plan packet. Because the idea is, if I'm a developer, if you're a developer, you wouldn't want to spend the thousands of dollars to prepare a site plan, a final plan, without the guarantee that the property is going to be rezoned. So, and the ordinance does say at the very end, it says once the PUD is rezoned, then the applicant can start working on their construction drawings and getting their permits, which is the same thing as saying they have to bring in the plans to Lisa Denoyer, the zoning administrator, and she's going to require them to go through a site plan review. So that's how I interpreted the ordinance. And I think that's not putting words in Matt's mouth, but when Matt and I talked, it seemed like that was the common sense and logical approach that many PUDs are operating under. Zone first, site plan second.
Logic may not be represented in our ordinance.
And the planning commission is going to start rewriting it this fall.
So do you see any problem with us making this conditional on the approval? Like saying we approve the rezoning for the PUD with the understanding that the final site plan will come back to us to be approved because that's what this says. That's my understanding. Is that a problem?
Typically, a final site plan doesn't come back to council. It stays with the planning commission. But you can recommend as part of your condition of rezoning that they have to submit a final site plan to the planning commission for review and approval. In fact, that was one of the conditions that the planning commission put on their approval, is that they have to come back and submit a final site plan. They wanted to clean up the language in the ordinance to make it very specific that the next step was going to be you're coming back for final site plan approval. So they were a little concerned about the wording in the ordinance as well, and they took care of that by adding that as a condition. So that was already taken care of by the planning commission.
Ms. Walker.
I'm trying to build off of what Derek had asked. I think he had asked a question whether there were any existent PUDs in our community. Wasn't that what you asked?
No, but that is a good follow-up.
So in my elementary thinking about development, I had wondered why we didn't look at it as this entire industrial zone, which is all along Standish and Buckley and goes up towards Washington Avenue, why we didn't just like rezone that for mixed use development and move it away from industrial, because obviously industry is not happening anymore. And there's probably better places for industry in Emmett County. So I was just wondering why, like, as a city, why we didn't like tackle that as like, let's just take it from an industrial zone to being more like a mixed use development that would kind of open up all the opportunities for whether that be residential or commercial or retail or whatever. But now we're going to do it as a planned unit development. So PUD sticks with that property forever. So would that be similar to what Great Lakes Center for the Arts was doing? That's our only other PUD that we've had.
That's a great question, Councilperson. But let me. PUD in Petoskey is a rezoning. So in the future, the city, if it does have a robust mixed use district embedded in its zoning code, could rezone the property mixed use development. Because this is a rezoning. In other communities that I work with and I recommend is we don't rezone property PUD. PUD is looked at as a development tool. That's an overlay, and it's a development agreement between the city and the developer, and it's recorded at the Register of Deeds office. It's not a rezoning on the property. Okay, and you probably are going to see that in the next rewrite. Okay, instead of going through the rezoning process, it's more of a development review process, and it's a legal agreement between both of the parties that's performance based. Okay, but we're working with what we have. I can't recall, haven't been working as a consultant here that long. I can't recall though of any PUDs that you've had. I think you got close to one with the Petoskey Point, but it never went through. But I can't, I seem to ask and no one can really recall of a PUD.
Great Lakes Center for the Arts is a PUD, isn't it not?
So is the old Kmart Plaza, is that not?
I think that,
Harbor Watch kind of.
I think maybe the Kmart Plaza may have been.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Those are the only two there.
Yeah. But what I'm getting at, their PUDs are not very familiar with Petoskey. So you don't have a lot of experience. And this is, for you as a council, this is probably as a group, first time you've really have looked at a PUD. And it is an educational process because it's not typical. It's not a typical rezoning. It's totally development based.
Yeah, thank you for answering my question, because that was my inclination, thinking like, why are we attaching a PUD just to this as a zoning tool? So that means that there's going to be another color on the map of our zoning?
No, what'll happen is on your map, there's going to be a boundary around this property that's going to say PUD zoning.
Okay.
Okay. It's not going to have a color. It's going to have an outline around it saying this is a PUD with the case number, which is then referenced on the map at this point.
Excellent. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you.
So my question is, are we in a position to move this to a second reading as is, or do we need an edit? And if it's an edit, is it a substantial enough one that it would have to come back as a first reading? And Mr. Cross, that might be for you. What?
Before quickly, I just want to make a comment. I appreciate Councilwoman Demores question and catch of that. From hearing Mr. Cross saying is defensible that for the non-lawyer ears, so sounded okay, great. That's where I stand.
And I would entertain a comment from you and then a motion, or we don't need a motion. It's just.
Yeah, and I don't really have much of a comment. I wish I could have come in here and given you guys a definitive, no, this is absolutely the way to lead this thing, but it's, I mean, I get the opposing view. I think that, again, this interpretation is defensible. But as to your question as to whether we can move forward today, or if there are revisions, whether we need another first reading, that depends on what the council wants to do with it. I mean, if you are good with this as written, unless there's like a typo, that's the type of thing I would say, okay, next time it's the second reading. But if you have me start tweaking the language a little bit, I guess it depends on what I change, but I would be inclined to say we need to have another first reading, but just leave it to the council to tell me what direction you'd like to go on this.
Tina?
Yeah. Again, for my part, I appreciate everything that you've said this evening, but to me, this I would just, again, to ensure that this is proper moving forward, given how murky this is, I would like this to be cleared up. That's just my perspective. There's 4 people at the table and we will decide.
Mr. Shields.
I am comfortable moving forward without that contingent language based off of that is defensible, based off that sounds like the planning commission desires to clear up the murkiness, and that in this instance, I'm comfortable moving forward.
Ms. Walker.
Yes.
Yes, you're comfortable or? Yes, okay. I'm comfortable moving it forward with all the understanding about the murkiness and that this is going to get cleaned up eventually.
Wayne is here. If you had any questions for Wayne, he's here. I think Jeff may be still on the Zoom as well. I don't know if you had any specific questions for them that we haven't already asked, but certainly Wayne is here and available if needed.
That'd be great if you wouldn't mind coming up to the mic and turning it, please.
So, yeah, your concerns are real. We toiled over this for hours and hours to produce what we did to interpret what your ordinance says. It's very vague. And so everything that was said is all real. It's a challenging ordinance to follow. And I just want to comfort you with Mike's not going to let us move he's already left. He's not going to let us move dirt. He's not going to let us move dirt until he's satisfied with everything that's happening out there in terms of the design and the engineering and the architecture. It's a lot of work ahead, and it's a big project. It's a great project, yeah, I guess I just want to comfort you, I guess, with any other words that I can't come to mind. As an engineer, I'm not very good at comforting words. But if I'm good, try to say it to the planning commission, John, when we went quite a ways with interpreting what that says. So we got a long ways to go. You're not going to see us go into a vacuum on what's going to happen next. We're going to be very integrated with your staff and with the planning commission. So thanks for letting us move forward here.
And John and Matt, thanks to all of you. Be good to move on. Thank you. Next up on new business, first reading again of a proposed ordinance that would amend Appendix A zoning ordinance regulating where short-term rentals are allowed. Mr. Horn.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over again to John, but I do want to give kudos to the planning commission. Cynthia Robson's in attendance. Charlie is not. He was. I know. They have done a really deep dive on this. A lot of extra time, effort has been spent on this to get us to where we are currently. John obviously has a lot of experience in this area, and I think brought that expertise to light as we kind of started refresh when John came on board, and Matt's obviously been here from the start, helping us kind of start walking down this road. So I'm going to turn over to John to kind of, again, give us an overview of where we're at currently and how we got to where we're at as we stand today.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Mayor Pro Tem and Council, there's 2 items on the under new business, and they're kind of interrelated, but they're in their own way, they're different. The first item is a amendment to Appendix A, which is the zoning code, which defines which zoning districts short-term rentals would be allowed as a permitted use. And those are all of the business classifications. with the condition that they're allowed as a use by right in the business districts, but they have to be on the upper levels of the businesses. This would include the local business district, the CBD, the transitional business district, the mixed use corridor, the general business district, and the resort commercial district. The other part of the ordinance includes a new definition for motel. We found that in the zoning code, there is a reference to hotel and motel. There is a definition for hotel, but there was not a definition for motel. So the planning commission also drafted a new definition for motel, and then they revised the definition for hotel. And really the substantive difference between a hotel and a motel is that a hotel is a lodging facility where access to the rooms are internal to the building through hallway. And a motel is a lodging facility where access to the rooms is external from the outside. And the reason why that's important is because a hotel and motel are allowed as permitted uses in the central business district. So the planning commission wanted clarity on that issue. The ordinance also has a definition for a short-term rental. So the first ordinance for the first reading is to amend the zoning code to allocate where short-term rentals are located in the zoning districts and cleaning up a couple of definitions. So that's this ordinance specifically.
Let's start with that one.
We start with that.
Yes. Council, comments, questions? Mr. Shields.
First, just one question. So you're limited to commercial buildings and the second floor. So a house in one of these districts would not be able to, unless they're grandfathered in, would not be able to do short-term rentals in their house. Correct. And the thinking of that was that's a pretty restrictive limiting factor. And so the idea of that was to limit it to as a commercial enterprise. I'm trying to think, was there notes on some of the thinking of the planning commissioners on deciding to go forward that way? Because in the district currently that where short-term rentals are allowed, it is open to any dwelling unit, any building, not just commercial buildings. Is that correct currently?
Well, the first question, the issue that the planning commission, when they set the ordinance up, was a recognition that they wanted to make sure that short-term rentals did not happen in residential zone districts.
Right.
There is a goal throughout the master plan of making sure that the community has enough accessible housing. And short-term rentals, basically, as you're aware, are taking year-round housing for residents, families off the market because they're used for business. Planning Commission also understands that in some of the outlying business districts, there are existing residential homes and commercial buildings that coexist together. But they wanted to make sure that those homes were not also transformed into more short-term rentals. So they limited it to commercial buildings on the upper floors. Now, you may have a former residential building that's in one of the outlying business districts that's been converted like into an office. In that case, they could put a short-term rental on the second floor if they put in an apartment. But they didn't want to encourage the transition or the transformation of other residential used buildings into short-term rentals, even if they're in a commercial district. So that was the rationale.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Moore.
So when you reference STRs by right on the upper floors, does that mean you're excluding them from the ordinance that governs short-term rentals? In other words, there would be no number limitation. They wouldn't have to apply for licenses or,
No.
okay?
And that's a great question, councilperson. That's why these ordinances are interrelated. The first ordinance is the zoning code that says these are the districts where they're allowed. The second ordinance that we'll get to next is the licensing provision
Correct.
that they would have to go through.
What's the meaning of STRs by right?
Short-term rental by right means it doesn't have to go through a special land use. They can come in to the zoning administrator if they're zoned properly, and they can get a zoning permit. But the next step would be they would have to go to the clerk's office to get a licensing permit if there's licenses available.
So they're subject to the number limitation that was established, and they're subject to the entire licensing process.
Correct.
Other questions? Mr. Shields?
I am not a fan of, so this is section 1719, number 4, where it talks about on page 82, where it talks about the off-street parking or required to do one off-street parking space. I support that, and then it adds an additional for a one bedroom dwelling unit, 2 off-street. So for an efficiency or 1 bedroom dwelling unit, 2 off-street parking spaces. Okay, no, I see it. So 2 off-street parking spaces for 2 bedrooms. Sorry, I think I would recommend simplifying that to say 1 off-street parking space, period, and cross out the rest. I'm not a fan of micromanaging the parking. So that is my recommendation.
And I would respectfully disagree with that. In fact, I think all council got a letter from a resident next to an existing short-term rental right now, where there's problems all the time with people parking in alleyways and in places they shouldn't. My question about that provision is I didn't see a definition of an efficiency. So I wondered, I mean, there's a common understanding of that, but I could see where people would try to get around that since that one requires only 1 space and others require more than that.
Mr. Shields?
In response, I think that we should regulate these negative consequences of short-term rentals through the next ordinance and through the limited number, not a parking standard.
Ms. Walker?
So on page 79, the opening of the agenda memo, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 B zones for business. The one that we've primarily been talking about is the central business district, the CBD district, which we all know that like the boundary of that. All of these other business districts, the 7 of them, I need to look at a map to understand our zoning. And so every time we have conversations around zoning, I think it would be helpful to have a map displayed somewhere so everybody could see the ultimate confusion about our numerous and business districts. And so I really struggle with, any like lay person or any like normal human that's not a planner understanding like what this means to their city. Because we have so many zones, it often feels like our rezoning process could not happen fast enough because of how difficult and muddy this is. So when we're referring to these things, nobody knows what we're talking about.
Mr. Moore?
So following up on that comment, I feel like this came before us back in February, and the Planning Commission has spent months doing a deep dive in this. And I have like questions that we could be here to midnight. I don't think anybody's in favor of that. So I just have a thought. I mean, I feel like we need time now to be able to dig into this and each one of us say whatever our concerns and that sort of thing. And one idea I had, and I'm just going to put this out there, I think there's a lot of anxiety in the community around this, and they'd like to see some movement. So what I'm wondering is, my thought was, I feel like we need time. And so I had this idea, some communities do a moratorium on license transfers and new SRTs, like for a period of whatever, 60 days or something like that. If we were to consider doing something like that to give this table the space to kind of do the work that the planning commission did, as opposed to like winging it in a sense tonight. That's an idea I thought I would bring to the table. And I feel like I would feel better about that. I don't know how that's received.
That quick question I would have is for Mr. Cross on, can we introduce something like that that's not in the agenda pack or in the
Well, not
pre-read?
tonight.
Oh,
Yeah, what I would maybe ask for tonight is a motion to have me prepare a moratorium ordinance. That's what other communities have done. That's how I'd recommend we do it. Just something real simple saying, look, we need to take a closer look at this. No new rentals or no new licenses, no transfers for however many days. And then, whatever we want to do from there.
Could we,
there's more.
wouldn't we have to like do that maybe at a special meeting or something, since it's not on our agenda tonight?
Yeah, well, to actually introduce the ordinance, yeah. But if you can give me some direction during this meeting, I guess you don't even, if you just want to give me the input that I should work on that ordinance, we can introduce it at a subsequent meeting, but, yeah.
Walker.
I've heard like 3 times already tonight that our ordinances are so outdated and difficult to deal with. It's like you're trying to fit something modern into something that's like old and antiquated and irrelevant. So the discussion comes up every time when we're talking about zoning or anything, short-term rentals or Michigan neighborhood block or redevelopment or PUDs or TIFA funds. And it's just like, look at that map. Somebody tell me there's an ability for some clarity. Our new contracted planning and zoning person also said tonight in this meeting, and forgive me if I'm misquoting you, but like it's antiquated. It's really difficult to operate and figure out, developers are having to score through our ordinances to make sense of it. And I just, like, the time has been like the past 3 years to do our rezoning. And I don't know why the efforts get diverted every time, but there needs to be some clarity there. I need like 4 colors and 4 zones. Not 17.
Let me provide some guidance. The city managers had conversations with MEDC, because you're a redevelopment ready community, that they're going to provide, we're hoping they will, and I'm sure they, based on my conversations with them as well, provide the city access to a technical assistance grant to rewrite the zoning code. And I agree with you, as small as this community is, and it's got 6 business classifications, way too much. The one thing I would ask council though, is that I get the idea that you want to take a deep dive into the licensing part of the short-term rental. Usually that's where a lot of the concerns are and a lot of the conversation is. I am asking though that the council consider approving the first reading, so the city has clarity on where these can go, because that's been part of the problem. That's why we have a number of them that are grandfathered already into the residential district. So separate the issues. We came at it together. They're kind of related, but one is a zoning ordinance and the other one is police power licensing. And it's the licensing that you need to take the deep dive in, because that's all the requirements that I.
Respectfully, there's portions of the first that refer directly to the second. An example, you're setting up the definitions of a short-term rental in the zoning provision, that it's for less than 30 consecutive days. I have some concerns with that. There's a reference to employee housing that's not defined. So respectfully, we had this in front of us back in February, and this is the first time it's come back to us. And it's complicated, and I think it's very important that we get it right. My perspective is that we need some time on this.
Mr. Shields.
Can maybe Mr. Cross, explain what the moratorium process looks like and what that means more?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to make it terribly complicated. It would just be an ordinance. And one of the examples I found is from a community not far away, East Bay Township in Grand Traverse County. And it would just be an ordinance saying exactly what we're saying here is like our desire is to put in place a licensing ordinance, a zoning ordinance. We need more time to do it. And then the interim, I mean, we know there's still demand for these licenses. We need some guidance because that's something that's been lacking over the past few years as these licenses have been issued. We don't have any clear guidance as to where they should go, what the standards are. So it's just a simple ordinance, just saying, look, these are the things we want to accomplish. That's why we want this moratorium in place. We enact it like we would any other ordinance. And then that would tell city staff, hey, no more transfers, no more new licenses. Stop for this number of days. We can extend it. That's what East Bay Township's done, at least on one occasion. So we're not, necessarily limited to that 60, 90-day window, whatever you choose. Matt, wouldn't this be as simple as a resolution versus an ordinance? You had mentioned ordinance a few times. Wouldn't this be a one meeting thing to adopt a moratorium via resolution? You can do it by resolution. I'm just telling you, I've seen other communities do it by ordinance. I mean, if we do it by resolution, we could do that as well. Really, I think the thing we need is just clear guidance to city staff who's actually on the ground dealing with these licensees, these prospective licensees, and these people looking to transfer the licenses. So whether you do it by resolution or ordinance, this isn't the type of thing that has to be done by ordinance. We could save that step if you want to put the resolution before the council today, and the moratorium could conceivably start today.
And for these first reading items, are we saying that the time between now and second reading isn't enough, or it is enough? I'm looking for some guidance on what people are thinking.
I'm saying for me, it isn't enough time. And, Lindsay, Ms. Walker has raised, Ms. Walker has raised the Walker and the Wagner, has raised, I think, reasonable concerns around just understanding what we're looking at. And again, this was with us in February. It went to the Planning Commission. They did a lot of due diligence over that period of time. And to expect us in 2 meetings to accomplish that, I think is a lot. And from my perspective, we don't need an enormous moratorium. We just need a space and time, 60 days, 90 days, whatever everyone thinks, in order to have our opportunity to do a deep dive and make sure we have a good blueprint going forward. That's my thinking.
And one other thing I just want to add real quick, in looking at our charter, section 6.2, it basically says our actions, your actions are either by resolution or ordinance. And this does seem to be the type of circumstance that would better fit as a resolution. Because the thing that differentiates the resolution from the ordinance, there are violations associated with, with violating the ordinance, but, or there are penalties, for violating the ordinance. So a resolution would be a perfect way to deal with it today.
And what would that do to these 4 items that are status as first reading?
Yeah, I think procedurally what it would look like would be a couple of different steps. I would table the ordinances, pass the resolution, the moratorium, and take it back up at a subsequent meeting after you've had the time you need. You feel like you're prepared to take it back up, take it off the table.
Ms. Walker.
Can we split it into licensing versus zoning? Is that a possibility? So to expedite with the zoning part and deal with the licensing in a different context?
That would be my recommendation. My last 2 years, I've probably been involved in 10 of these. And I can tell you that the licensing agreement can go on for 2 years. Because you're not going to satisfy everybody's concerns. So it would be admirable if you can accomplish it in 60 days. I'm thinking it's going to take you longer. But I have to tell you that on the zoning side, we need to get some resolution. The moratorium will prevent any more STRs going in. But at some point, we have to determine where the STRs can go in the city, because we really don't have a lot to fall back on right now. So.
Mr. Moore.
If there's a moratorium on the licensing, what's the urgency on the zoning?
I think it's just the clarity, because the questions that come into the city, zoning administrator, that people, realtors are calling, asking what zones they can go into. The planning commission is recommending a cap of 40. I think that when an analysis is really done in the community, you're probably already at that or even more. Communities have not taken this situation aggressively. And by the time they do, like your neighbor across the bay, they already have close to 100 STRs in the city.
But if there was a moratorium in place, there wouldn't be any additions.
True, but I think I would defer to the legal counsel. Is that my experience is you can only create a moratorium for a certain period of time without running into other issues from people basically saying that the moratorium is too long and you're basically using it to avoid or evade the issue.
So we could certainly establish a moratorium that was approved by our legal counsel.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. Last comment, I promise. So if we're being asked in the first reading here to approve a short-term rental zoning ordinance, and we've got 6 of them here, and the only one that I'm really familiar with is the Central Business District. I need to see a map of B1, B2A, B2B, B3, and B3A to understand what we're talking about. Like, I could never make a decision with a bunch of letters here. And yeah.
We will prepare you a color-coded map with just the business districts.
Okay.
Good.
Because I would propose to say, like, just off the cuff, that we should probably only allow short-term rentals in the Central Business District.
So we have A, B, C, and D. Are you suggesting we push forward on some?
No, Mayor Pro Tem, I think what I'm hearing is that on items B and C, you would table those and then discuss those during the moratorium period.
And then A and D,
Well, A, we went to first reading. D would be the next rezoning that I would like to talk to you about after we get through these two.
Yeah, that one's not about short-term.
right?
That one's good.
I just want to make sure I understand.
What I'm hearing from council is postpone the first reading on item B and C and include that in the moratorium for further discussion.
Are
On the agenda.
we good with that?
I'm sorry. This one.
Okay.
Yeah, that those be a part, both B and C be a part of the moratorium. Do you see a problem with that, legal counsel? Including the zoning ordinance and the moratorium?
No, I think we're kind of.
Your microphone. I think we're kind of mashing our different tasks together. I mean, it's the moratorium is sort of, as I think of it, separate and apart from these proposed ordinances. We're saying because there is some licensing activity that's going on now, even in the absence of this regulatory scheme that we need. So moratorium is saying city staff, no more new licenses, no more transfers. So I see that as kind of separate from what I would consider tabling these ordinances so we could take them up later. And we don't even necessarily have to put a date on when we take them up again. It's just when we, presumably once the moratorium is expired, I mean, there's arguably nothing preventing us if we say moratorium for 6 months and we meeting on the minds, we figured out in 3. I mean, there's not really anything that would prevent us from taking it up sooner. And for what it's worth, I mean, East Bay Township, which was the example I gave you before, they had an initial 6-month moratorium, extended it by another 6. Where have any legal challenge to that? I know there's concerns if we kick the can down the road indefinitely. I would definitely wouldn't recommend a 1-year moratorium, but for what it's worth, that 1 year hasn't been subject to any challenge that I'm aware of.
So should the motion to table, if we proceed with that, be taken at this meeting or at the meeting where we were to resolve about the moratorium? Should we do that?
so are we not wanting to move forward with this? What I was thinking we would do is motion tonight to table items 9B and C. And then as a separate action, a resolution to put in place a moratorium on short-term rental licensing for however many days you all decide. And then, at a subsequent meeting, someone can make the motion to remove these proposed ordinances from the table, and we can take them up again.
Thank you. Would somebody like to make that motion?
I motion to table items 9B and C.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Hearing none? Ms.
Ahead
Beck?
of you. Demore,
Which we need.
Sorry.
Aye.
Shields,
Yes.
Walker.
Yes.
Wagner.
Yes. Motion to table 9B and C passes. And I was losing track of A, B, C, and D. I get it now.
So sorry.
So the last item of new business is D, first reading of a proposed ordinance that would amend the city of Petoskey zoning map, right?
You want to proceed with a moratorium tonight or do it on a special meeting?
I think Matt said he could prepare it.
Yeah, I could put it in writing. I mean, you could introduce a resolution tonight. I mean, just be very specific so Sarah can capture it in the minutes. But I mean, it's really, we could do it at a subsequent meeting.
Can we do that without it being on the agenda though?
You
Because
can amend the agenda. I mean, the Open Meetings Act doesn't require an agenda period. So you can take, if there's the consent to take it up tonight, even though it's not on the agenda, you can still do it. It's just, it's a question of, I mean, if you want full transparency, if you feel like you want public comment, it wasn't on the agenda. I understand that. I'm just saying if you wanted to proceed with the resolution tonight, even though it wasn't on the agenda, it's not going to be an Open Meetings Act violation or anything.
are we having an upcoming special meeting?
We have to schedule.
To be determined.
Maybe wait for our session.
Wait for a special meeting.
Perhaps we will see if we're having a special meeting or not.
I guess what I'm here, we're not going to do the resolution tonight. I'll put something in writing for council to consider at the next opportunity.
And I didn't open it up to public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? I welcome you up to the microphone. Please introduce your full name and address. Sorry about that.
Just that bar.
There you go.
Good evening. My name is Dottie Landis. I'm at 1102 Howard Street in Petoskey. And before I begin with my statement, I just wanted to clarify the proposed zoning for the short-term rentals that was going to be discussed tonight, I believe, does not include residential 1 or 2, correct? Okay. I believe I'm in 1, but if it doesn't include either, then I wasn't included in the expansion of the zoning ordinance. So I'm just going to begin with my notes, if you don't mind. Our city's master plan notes that 45% of Petoskey's year-round residents fall into the working class poor category as defined by the United Way's Alice 2019 data. Based on the data, the annual survival budget for a single person in Petoskey is just over $21,000, just over $62,000 for a family of 4. Our city's master plan also notes that without an economic safety net, this vulnerable population that fills our essential worker positions is most at risk of housing insecurity and possible homelessness. When I moved to Petoskey in 2020, I fell into this category. I still do. I was fortunate 3 years ago to get financed for a mortgage loan to purchase a small home in residential Petoskey. After purchasing the home, I considered supplementing my income by utilizing my property as a short-term rental during periods of time that I was not home or even renting out a room when I was. When I learned that Petoskey had put into place an ordinance preventing nearly all short-term rentals in the city, I began seeking information about the restrictions. I spoke to the city manager, the city planner, the members of the planning committee, and city council members. I was told that the regulations stemmed from the following, and I have 5 different statements that I received while I was asking questions, and I didn't enumerate who said them. The first comment was that there were numerous complaints city staff received in residential neighborhoods, particularly relating to noise issues, trash problems causing unwanted animals in areas of town, parking, and transient activity. The second reason was allowing short-term rentals reduces the amount of workforce housing stock and year-round rental options, as we heard tonight. Another statement was, unlike other states, in Michigan, local communities do not get revenue from short-term rentals, nor does our area convention and visitors bureau get room tax to help promote the area. That was another reason that we have restricted our short-term rental opportunities. The fourth was, I was told short-term rentals compete with the city's lodging industry. And the fifth was an anecdotal piece of evidence from someone on the planning committee stating that their neighbors who Airbnb had experienced noise and trash violations. When I asked where I could find these discussions and data to support these claims, I was pointed to the minutes of 2 city council meetings in January of 2014, neither of which noted discussions leading up to the implementation of the ordinance or data to support the claims. I then spoke to the Petoskey Department of Public Safety, who informed me that they do not, in fact, track short-term vacation rentals as a group, nor do they track similar data for long-term rentals, single residence homes, or multi-residence homes. And I've yet to receive an explanation of how renting my only home or room in it reduces the city's workforce housing stock. I stopped asking questions after speaking with a city employee who told me, while you were looking for data that backs up our decision, the reality is the protection of our community character and keeping the quality of life for residents is often what drives public policy. That person then left me with a defeating and insulting send-off. She said, as a new resident to the community, you will soon realize how much Petoskey residents love and want to protect their community. The reason I chose this beautiful, dynamic city to relocate to was and remains anything but being included in a community that loves and wants to protect these things. Before I set foot in Petoskey, I was fully aware of the privilege it was to live here. There's no reason that I would involve myself in any activity that would tarnish the character of my home or my community. In a city that is creeping up on an income to housing cost ratio of nearly double the Michigan average, I'm hopeful that Petoskey is as interested in enabling its lodging industry and business community to thrive as it is in its residents' ability to thrive. The residents most essential to our community and our economy's survival, those of us who work 40+ hours a week and still struggle to finance our cost of living, at the end of the day, simply desire to rest assured that we have a roof over our heads. If both ensuring my family has that and offering housing to others in this community that need it, I look forward to learning more about why the city still feels it's important to prevent my ability to do so. And thank you for being thorough about this and taking the time to have a community discussion about it. 2 years ago, when I asked these questions, I said, I'm willing to be a part of a community discussion. Is there a community discussion? And I still haven't had a call back from any of these people saying, yes, we're going to have that community discussion. We're going to have it. We're going to have it thoroughly. We're going to have it compassionately. We're going to listen. And we're going to be honest about what we can do as a city council. And we're going to listen. And we're going to make a rational decision. I just want to be a part of that. So thank you for letting me know when that's going to happen.
Thank you, Ms. Marcus.
Thank you.
Other public comments?
Well, I won't take very long. My name is Ruth Allen. I live at 301 Jackson. I'm a homeowner. I have a question and a comment. My question is, I was under the understanding that the business district was already licensed for VRBO already. But because I know that there's several businesses that have new VRBOs downtown, and I'm specifically talking about downtown. But whatever the case, so I just want to understand that the new proposal with the housing shortage for the workforce is a little confusing, because to me, the businesses that have the apartments above, so we're saying that we're going to expand the VRBOs to a wider audience for the businesses, while the workers below do not have a place to live. So it's just a little bit, you would think that it would be the opposite, where maybe there was an ordinance where the apartments, because it used to be years ago, I'm a longtime resident, people would live downtown in the apartments and work downtown. And that's what it's going away from. And I see where that's part of the rental problem, I believe. In some of these business districts, I live in an area where there is like a business across the street from me, and that where people are renting above, that would be one of the places that would probably turn to VRBO, which I don't mind because 2 doors down, there is a licensed VRBO that's grandfathered and have never had a problem with them. I just wanted to make the comment that I just think it's a little bit backwards, and maybe it should be revisited as part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Thanks for your comment. Can you clarify? Yeah, I think you said you had a question too. The question, if we can answer it, we will.
The question was, maybe we could revisit the proposal as part of, not the VRBOs and expanding it. I did have a question. I live over by the hospital, and you were talking about rezoning and stuff. There's a lot of houses there and people who have, I know the city has proposed the ADU units last year, and I think there's only 2 within the year, and I'm one of them. I went through the whole process. I put a lot of money in my little carriage house, almost $20,000-$30,000, and it's still not done. But the restrictions on that and the process was something. But with that being said, the provisions for that, and that's a whole separate thing, is that we're allowed to rent those ADUs for 3 months. And with the hospital workers, there's a lot of travelers and a lot of doctors that we need. And a lot of times they're only here for a month or 2, and it doesn't fit into that ADU unit. There's a few things that there's definitely some things that can be worked out with that, but that's a whole separate thing. But anyways, I appreciate you listening, and thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
And that particular one with ADUs it came up at our ward convention, and that's on a list of about 8 or 10 things that we've submitted, and I expect we'll get answers to. So thank you. Other public comments?
There's one online.
Oh, yes.
Everyone's down here.
Ellison Patton, when you're unmuted, please share your full name and your address and address council.
Thank you. This is Allison Patton. I wanted to weigh in on the short-term rental ordinance this evening. I don't have a dog in this race because I fortunately don't live adjacent to any of the properties that are currently grandfathered or any of the districts where it would be allowed. But I do want to just make a few comments. First of all, I do want to respond respectfully to the first person who came to the podium. I empathize with anybody who has economic difficulty meeting their needs, but at the same time, I do strongly believe, and I think everyone on council also recognizes, that having short-term rental restrictions is what this community wants. We can't have a free-for-all. Residential zoning means that this is a zoning district where people are supposed to be residing, not running a business to make money through renting their place out. I also wanted, before getting into just a few comments I want to make about the current draft before council, I also wanted to respond very briefly to the comments made by Councilperson Shields and Ms. Walker. I don't see why this STR process would need to be delayed because Ms. Walker is having trouble understanding what the business districts are in this city. I've seen a map, I've accessed a map on the internet, and I don't even sit on city council. But moreover, even if sometime in the future, the city were to change the business districts, then you're going to just make the changes throughout all of the city ordinances. We don't need to stymie this process of getting something in place that is clear and makes sense by getting involved in some extraneous issue about do our business districts make sense? And then Mr. Shields indicated that he thinks that there should only ever be a requirement for parking for one vehicle. And, you know, I don't think the community is in support of that. Many of these units that are grandfathered now, or that will be in a business district, which will not even require grandfathering and just require a license. These are large properties. It's not just going to be, 2 people staying there. Now, maybe, that threshold could be set at 3 bedrooms or more, you need 2 parking spaces, but to simply require 1 parking space when parking is such a limited commodity for people living in this city, that I think is just opening up the door to trouble. All right, moving on. I did want to identify 4 problem areas that I see in the short-term rental ordinance is currently drafted. Number 1, as pointed out by Councilperson Demore, there does absolutely need to be a definition of employee housing. We can't have that just completely left undefined. It will be abused, taken advantage of, and will just create an unfair situation for everybody. So some kind of definition for employee housing, since this is going to be an exemption under what is being looked at, there needs to be a definition. Problem number 2 is that there is no language currently in the ordinance as drafted that says that the grandfathered status terminates effective upon transfer of the property. In the overview that is in the preceding page of the ordinance itself, it says in the overview, this is the overview with the date prepared June 20, 2023. It says, quote, prior actions by the city have resulted in STRs being prohibited in residential zoning districts except for those STRs that existed prior to the enactment of this policy. And these STRs have been grandfathered and may continue until the properties are sold. So that is stated in the overview, but there's no language in the ordinance itself. And there needs to be that grandfathered status terminates upon transfer of the property. I also want to point out as issue number 3 that there are actually 4 properties on the grandfathered list right now that have been sold since 2014, which is the year that they were grandfathered. The overview statement indicates that the intention at the time of the grandfathering was that that would continue until the properties are sold. 4 of them on the list now were already sold, and yet they're still on the grandfathered list. And I don't understand that. And I think there at least needs to be some judgment made about whether that's appropriate or not. The whole idea behind the grandfathering was, okay, look, we're now going to have this new rule that in the residential zoning districts, we're not going to let people do this anymore. And then there were some owners who said, well, I've already been doing it. And the city said, okay, so we're going to grandfather you. But that doesn't mean that the property should be grandfathered forever and ever and in perpetuity. That was never the intention. And yet apparently it's happened. So at the bare minimum, we need to stop that from happening going forward. And we need to have language in the new ordinance that's going to say that the grandfathered status is going to terminate effective immediately upon transfer of the property. And the 4th thing I wanted to address is that the penalties for violations are completely inadequate and unclear. Okay, so we've got, you got your license, you're one of these people profiting from your property and doing these short-term rentals. So first violation gets you a written warning, second violation, a fine, a third, your license is revoked and no new additional bookings may be made. All right, so here's the reality as I see it. I get my license in April. By May, I'm going to be on VRBO, HomeAway, whatever, and I'm going to have my property booked for June, July, and August in May. All right, no problem. We all see how many people are coming into the city of Petoskey. It's not going to be a problem. You will have your place rented. Okay, so now I get my first violation in June. Oh, written warning, big deal. Next month, I get my second violation. It's a fine. It's going to be a pittance compared to the kind of money I'm making renting my place. And then I get my third violation in August and my license is revoked. Well, it's only a 1-year license in the first place. I've already got my bookings for June, July, and August. I've already made buku books. So who cares if my license is revoked at that point? And then no additional bookings. I don't need any additional bookings. I've made buku bucks renting my place June, July, and August. So I think number one, we need to be clear about, are the violations cumulative and are they going to carry over from 1 year into succeeding years? I would urge that it happen that way. I don't think we should allow any of these people to have 3 violations each year of their license, because that's not a penalty at all. It's going to be completely ineffective. So I think there needs to be language that the violations are cumulative and carry over into subsequent years. Also, it's strange to me that under 4D as in dog, you have the second sentence there. This is the first sentence is, if a licensee is in default to the city of Petoskey, this license may be revoked. Then the second sentence there under D is, if revoked, the licensee may apply to be placed on the waiting list. It seems to me that that sentence should be a standalone sentence so that the language is clear that if your license gets revoked, maybe you'll get back on the waiting list, but you're going to be at the bottom of the waiting list. And I don't even know if we want to allow somebody who's had their license revoked to get off that easy. I mean, maybe there should be a period of time where they're not even allowed to get on the waiting list. And then once they've exhausted that, fulfilled that, then they can go to the bottom of the waiting list. But the bottom line is what's here right now as the penalties for violations are completely inadequate.
Ms. Patton?
Yes.
Could you please get your home address? We missed that part.
602 East Lake.
Thank you.
All right, so that takes care of the comments I wanted to make, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
What was that lady's name?
Ellison Patton, P-A-T-O-N.
Was she?
Name and address council, please.
Richard Smith, 115 Division Street. That lady brought up an interesting observation in her second third. She said that license were grandfathered despite the fact that they weren't supposed to. So that was interesting to me because I heard that comment before, but I never brought it up. So grandfathered licenses that were not supposed to be passed on did get passed on. So because they were passed on, it was illegal to pass them on. So do they have a legal license now? And the question.
We can,
Just a point of order. I mean, public comment is for comment,
Right.
for question and
just
answer.
comment, yeah.
I just, that was a comment.
Okay,
Thank you very
thank
much.
you.
Otherwise, I like the work put in by the planning commission on that.
Thank you very much. Other comments?
Appropriate to reapprove them.
Yes, you can approach the microphone.
Well, it's point of order. I mean, it's supposed to be one person up to 5 minutes. So I wasn't timing last time she came up. So just for what it's worth, so it's your call, Mayor Pro Tem.
Is it a
Very short.
quick comment?
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't cut off the other one after 5 minutes.
Just this lady's comment that short-term restrictions are critical to the community. I didn't say that they weren't. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't say that they weren't critical. Restrictions to short-term rentals, yes, critical. I didn't say that they weren't. I'm all for it. And I brought up the economic situation, not just because Dottie has an economic situation. 45% of your year-round residents have an economic situation. Some of them are homeowners. So we do fall into that same category of people in Petoskey needing housing and needing to be able to afford their housing. Restrictions, I'm for it. Please do restrict it. Please do be careful about them. The restrictions could be something like someone like me. I don't have 2 homes. I have 1 home. Still would like to know why I can't rent out a room in my home to supplement my income to afford that housing. So it wasn't, anecdotal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I'd like to move on to the final matter of new business. First reading of a proposed ordinance that would amend the city of Petoskey zoning map to rezone parcel 52-19-07-201-059 from R2 single family to I1 light industrial district. I turn it over to Mr. Horn, to Mr. Colangelo.
Mayor Pro Tem Council, this is I would like to say it's straightforward, but it may not be. The property owner, gentleman owns both a large piece of property and adjacent to it, a smaller parcel. He would like to, he's got 2 pieces of property, each with a different zoning. He's asking for the smaller piece, which is R2, to be rezoned to light industrial. So all of his property is light industrial. All of the property in this area, the other 4 parcels are all zoned light industrial. On the other side of Clarion Street Avenue, those are light industrial. The master plan shows these areas as light industrial. The planning commission held a public hearing, took a look at the master plan, look at the request, and they say it's consistent. They're recommending approval.
Thanks, John. Council comments, questions? This is again the first reading. Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. So the request, so if this, okay, so the area, I know exactly where the piece of the parcel is that you're talking about, and everything to the north is supposed to be residential, and everything to the south there would be light industrial. Why wouldn't you consider like rezoning this area as mixed use so that it can accommodate both types?
Because it's not in the master plan at this point in time. The master plan showed that area is industrial in character.
Well, the master plan reflects what is, not what could be.
Well, that's the future land use map, and the master plan shows what reflects what should be in the future. And the master plan, the future land use map has this area as an industrial area. Light industrial, not heavy, light.
Other comments, questions? Mr. Moore.
I'm not familiar with this area from the map, so I'm glad that Miss Wag, here I go again. Lindsay, may I? Thank you. But it says that there were no objections expressed from notified property owners. Just by way of anecdotal information, are there a lot of, since it is R2, Are there a lot of other residential properties near there? Are they across the street or?
Well, if you take a look at the staff memo, there's an aerial photo.
I see it.
The dashed orange line, there's a.
We don't have color.
Oh, you didn't print the color. Here, may want to pass that down. Okay.
I'll just do that.
There's a orange dash line on the analysis. That's an area that's got a significant topographic incline. Above that are R2 residents. Below is the pole barns and some of the light industrial.
Okay.
So when you're 60 feet above, you're actually looking out towards the Bear River. You're not really looking down at these properties per se.
And this is in the down portion?
This is in the down portion.
Okay.
Walker.
It's actually Hungry Hollow. So that whole historic area is where the majority of our native population lived around that Hungry Hollow neighborhood. So it probably should remain residential, and into the future with future ordinances and changing our zoning map to reflect more opportunities for housing. I just think that like going from single family I have a problem with R2 single family as well. I think it should be like multifamily or mixed use development or something broader and more encompassing and more inclusive than going to light industrial. Because there really isn't a future for industry in that area from all perspectives. And since we're in such a housing crisis, and think of a plethora of other areas in our region that are better suited for industry.
Well, councilperson, there are several businesses that are right in that area on that.
I know it's the neighborhood I live in. I walk it all the time.
Well, they're there.
There is industry there. You're right. American Spoon Foods, Salvation Army, the railroad tracks. Yeah.
Mr. Shields.
Thank you. Can you remind us, light industrial, some of the restrictions, setbacks? I'm wondering, Ms. Walker, if I agree with you, not a fan of R2 and the restrictions there for maybe a different housing option. Is light industrial, what are the restrictions and are the restrictions on housing residential?
There's no housing that's allowed in.
No housing that's allowed at all. Okay.
If you take a look at the map, the person owns the large parent parcel. The small parcel that's in the outline is he wants to combine the two properties together, and he wants them to have the same zoning. So that's why he's asking to go from R2 to light industrial. So he can combine the parcels like the other ones to the north, and they all have the same zoning.
May I ask how he uses the light industrial now?
It's pretty much vacant at this point. There's 3 businesses to the north of him on that right of way, which doesn't really have a name.
And I'm assuming this is council comment time and then public comment time, and we have time before a second reading to review. And any other comments from council? Not public comment? Anyone online, Sarah?
Yes. Ryan Hall.
Brian Hall, 5-minute limit. First and last name and your address, please.
Good evening. I'm the current owner of 1624 Clarion Avenue. And I just wanted to add, I enjoy all the feedback, but one thing, this lot is so small, according to the Michigan Building Code Book, nothing can be built on it. So essentially, The plan is just to absorb that into a larger parent lot, which had already been stated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No further comments. We will move on to city council comments.
Actually, Mayor Pro Tem, just a point of order. I may have missed this. Sorry, it's been a long day, but when we tabled items 9B and C, I believe there was a motion and a second. I don't recall.
Oh, we did not go back and vote, did we? You did?
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, we did. It was 4-0. Okay.
Figured it was possible. I completely missed it, but thank you.
All right. And this one went afterwards to public comment. So I was out of order there. Thank you. All right, city council comments, starting with Ms. Tina DeMore. I know, poor Lindsay Walker has to go first all the time.
So I'm only wondering, in follow up to our conversations with cabling and also Derek being gone at the next meeting, if we might want to talk about a special meeting in order to advance the resolution about the moratorium. And I don't know if there would be opportunities for discussions on the pro forma that's coming to the city manager. But I wonder with all of us here, if that might be worth discussing. It's not really a comment, it's a question.
Yeah, can we cover both, Shane?
Yeah, I would need to get some direction on if, number one, if is there a desire for a special meeting, and number two, what that date looks like. I did get a few of you chimed in the week of the 10th. So I have a few of your comments thus far. I did text the mayor, he is available that week as well.
Of those that have chimed in, which I'm not one of them, do we have it like a focal point, like a date or anything that?
Just not Monday night. It sounds like Tuesday sounded like a viable option, the 11th.
If I was available, it would be on Monday that week.
Oh.
And I understand I understand it's the way things are. So I'm not asking for a special, appreciate that, accounting to try to attend that meeting. But if it was the 10th, I potentially I can try to make that work.
I can do it any night that week.
I can do it on Monday, but I'm gonna be dirty and tired because I'm coming back from Bliss Fest and cleaning up 8,000 people's worth of garbage, so. Yeah.
Understood.
I can bring chocolate, would that help?
Plenty of hydration.
I can do it on
My sense is this is an important enough topic. We need to have a meeting, I believe, and ideally we have everyone there.
Lindsay, would doing it a bit later or something help you out, or?
I mean, it'd have to be after 8 o'clock, but that, I mean, I will show up. We changed our board meetings and our board convention from that Monday and Wednesday and moved it up. And so now, once again, I found myself in a situation where the busiest time of my work life, I have another evening meeting and I'm going to show up and I'm not going to be very plain, but just be down. I won't be showing up in the suit.
Is there another time before that?
I'm wondering, is Mayor back when we do it?
We're talking about the week of 4th of July.
Yeah, I think
That's
sorry, probably not.
That was the 4th of July week. End of the week.
Can the mayor be there on the 10th?
Yep.
All right.
I'm just thinking if everybody can do it on the 10th, then Lindsay's gonna come dirty. That might be our day.
I'm just.
And that's 6 o'clock.
When
Meeting can we do?
Is like if we do it at 7, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's fine.
7?
Six or seven.
7, can we do it a little bit later? Sorry. Will that work?
It's your meeting, so.
When are you leaving, Derek?
that next morning.
Oh, okay, yeah, I was gonna say the next morning, we,
7 o'clock it is. Sounds like. And that would be where we'd have the resolution. That's all I have. Thank you. Oh, one other thing. I just want to make sure everybody saw this letter from the constituent in Ward 1 with input about short-term rentals. Everybody got it. Shane gave it to you. So thank you.
Mr. Shields.
Just a comment, say I really appreciate public comments tonight. I appreciate the citizen comments at our ward convention and the city convention. I love the dialogue, get energized by it. So thank you.
Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I also appreciate all kinds of civic engagement. It is helpful to hear from constituents and people throughout the city on their comments about these policies that affect our very lives and our livelihood. So I also appreciate that and the ability of people to come forth and speak. I know that it takes a lot of courage to speak in front of city council, especially if you're not accustomed to speaking at public meetings. So I do recognize that as well. You know, there was a lot of information in our packets this weekend as we prepared for this meeting, and just really highlights the need. And I give so many kudos to our planning commission because it is a tremendous amount of work. And it just highlights like how much work we have to do to really get our ordinances in line with modern society, and acknowledging that initially ordinances and zoning were meant to keep certain people out. And so I always have to kind of remind myself of that history when we move forward into a future that tries to be more diverse, inclusive, and providing access to people that have historically been denied access by zoning and regulation. So I kind of wear that lens all the time. And sometimes that kind of prevents me from moving forward on an issue or kind of stymies the ability to move quickly. So I think it requires a gentle balance. And I always appreciate the input from others that maybe aren't necessarily wearing that lens, so I can making sure that I'm representing all folks and issues and taking into account so many different issues. So thank you to everybody that provides that, and people that stand up and speak in public meetings, but also our civil council that helps give us the legal direction, and staff that helps us kind of guide us along those ways as well. Thank you.
All great comments. Thank you. And I appreciate that. Please extend our thanks to the planning commission. And we really do appreciate all your hard work. And my other comment is that at my ward convention, and I know at Tina's ward convention, we were each nominated to run again for office and accepted. And I know I really look forward to it and appreciate the honor and privilege of serving the people of Petoskey. With that, at 8:32 p.m., I call this meeting adjourned.